John Poseidon Posey, born in Kent, England, father Wolfgang Posey and mother Mary Elizabeth Hargrove Posey, was the first mate upon the Mayflower during its departure in 1620. Rough seas took many lives, but old Poseidon Posey announced, "'Tis born of the sea. I am the rightful heir, and will reclaim my sea home in the name of my true father Poseidon the first, if you know what I mean." Posey was one of the first men to touch American soil, and with haste a declaration was given. "I will call this Plymouth Rock. My pace is finite. Let it be known that I surveyed this ground in the name of the King." Cheers explode like cannon fire, and during Jubilee, Posey hugs the nearest sea dog and says, "See the pile of stones on the shore? I'll bet that's an old native property marker." And it was. Poseidon married and had 13 children, all girls and one boy. Poseidon was a bit of a poet in his free time, and legend has it when quill hit parchment, he was lethal. Alice Rothschild Posey received a letter of desire. It read, "Gosh damn, I'm so handsome. Gaston meets Barry Bonds meets Samson. Very strong man getting damsels to dampen. They're fine with a wait in a line for a chance tar. Sit on me and tell me what they want like Santa. I got a real long naughty list. Long dong I bestow upon the populace. Let me put an heir in there. Let me put a son in your stomach. Let me in that derriere. Let me put a bun in your oven. Let me preheat that thang. Let me put some butter on your muffin. Let's have like 12 kids. How about a baker's dozen?" And they did. John Posey, only son of Poseidon Posey, a smallholder farmer whose ambitions were far greater than his acreage, and whose weakness was tobacco. After a modest harvest, John vowed to sample only a little of his crop to test its quality, but the days grew long and the pipes grew many. One pouch led to another, then another, until the curing shed stood empty and the fields bore nothing but trampled stalks. By winter, Posey had bartered away neither leaf nor profit, having smoked his entire yield into memory and ash. Neighbors would later joke that no one ever enjoyed a harvest more completely, though the farmer himself learned that satisfaction, once burned, could not be sold. His life measured not in years, but in seasons, in the steady turn of soil beneath a wooden plough. By dawn he was already in the fields, hands cracked and darkened by sun and labor, tending tobacco stalks with a quiet patience learned from his father before him. He married young, built his own house from rough timber, and buried 2 children before they learned to walk, as was too often the way of that century. When illness took him at 47, the neighbors said he had lived a full life nonetheless. He left behind a disheveled farm, a wife who knew every fence line by heart, and land that would remember his footsteps long after his name faded from the headstone. Benjamin Posey, son of John Posey, first found success as a grain farmer. In time, he learned to mill his harvest into a light, airy flatbread he named Postilla, which quickly gained popularity throughout the northern regions. Over the years, Postilla became a staple enjoyed from coast to coast. However, in the 7th year of production, demand suddenly collapsed. Sales plummeted, and Postilla quietly disappeared from the market. In 1731, while speaking with a traveller passing through the region, Benjamin reminisced about his long-lost creation. The traveller listened with curiosity, then reached into his satchel and produced a remarkably similar bread. He called it a tortilla, a staple widely used in the southern lands and commonly paired with beans. This moment marked Benjamin's first encounter with Mexican technology, an exchange some would later claim helped restructure the future territory known as Texas. Elijah Posey, son of Ben Posey, was known as a man whose words carried more weight than any blade or coin. Though he lived humbly, his poetry traveled far beyond his home, recited in taverns, churches, and candlelit parlors where listeners fell silent at the rise and fall of his verses. Elijah wrote of land and loss, of faith tested by wilderness, and of the quiet strength required to endure an uncertain age. His voice was measured and deliberate, and when he spoke, even hardened men paused to listen. In a century ruled by empire and powder, Elijah Posey proved that language itself could be a form of power. This was his most famous poem. Upon the land at dusk, the sun lays down its crown of fire, and fields grow still beneath the sky. The plough rests where the hands once bled, and sparrows claim the day now fled. I have asked the earth for bread and truth. She answered both with toil and proof, that nothing given comes without cost, and all things kept are first made lost. So let the night take what it must, my breath, my fear, my borrowed dust. For come the dawn, though weak I stand, I rise again at the command of land. Ezekiel Posey, son of Eli Posey, was known along the riverbanks as a man of uncommon cheer and unmatched knowledge of the water. From the pull of the tides to the habits of every fish that swam beneath the surface, he seemed to know it all, reading the river as others read books. Ezekiel greeted each morning with a smile, certain that the day would offer either a good catch or a good story, and often both. His nets were mended with care, his hooks chosen with purpose, and his advice was freely given to any who asked. To those who watched him work, it was clear that Ezekiel's true skill was not just in fishing, but in finding joy in the rhythm of the water and the life it provided. Ezekiel married and had a son, Ulysses, and from the moment he could walk, the river claimed him as surely as it had claimed his father. As a boy, he followed Ezekiel along the banks, carrying nets too large for his small hands, and listening as his father spoke of currents and seasons as if they were old friends. Ulysses learned early that the river gave and took in equal measure, teaching him patience when the fish was scarce and humility when the catch was plenty. Though Ulysses chose a different path when Ezekiel grew older, he carried with him forever the wisdom the river had taught. Ulysses Posey, son of Ezekiel Posey, kept a small shop that never seemed as full as he hoped it would be. The shelves held useful goods, cloth, nails, ledgers, and lamp oil, but customers came and went with careful eyes and lighter purses. Each morning, Ulysses swept the floor and opened his door with quiet determination, believing that perseverance itself was a kind of investment. Though profit rarely followed his long hours, he remained honest in his dealings and patient in his waiting. In a time of growing towns and shifting fortunes, Ulysses Posey stood as a man caught between ambition and hardship, holding fast to dignity even as success remained just beyond reach. Howard Posey, son of Ulysses Posey, emerged as a steady hand during the turbulent years of Texas's early growth. Drawn west by promise and uncertainty, he helped establish settlements through hard labor, negotiation, and a firm belief in order on a restless frontier. When lawlessness followed expansion, Howard answered the call to serve as a Texas Ranger, bringing discipline and resolve to a land still defining itself. Known for his calm judgment and unyielding sense of duty, he patrolled vast stretches of territory where justice often depended on the character of the man enforcing it. Through grit and service, Howard Posey became part of the living foundation upon which Texas built its reputation for resilience and independence. Howard Posey met his end in 1839 beneath the wide Texas sky, serving as a ranger in a land still raw and unsettled. He had ridden hard for days, tracking trouble along the frontier, his rifle worn smooth from use and his resolve sharpened by years of hard living. When the fight came, it was sudden and unforgiving, the kind of clash that left little room for hesitation or retreat. Howard stood his ground, buying time for others to escape, and though the wounds he suffered proved mortal, those who found him later said his face was calm, as if he had accepted the cost of the duty he chose. He was buried not far from where he fell, and in time the grass grew tall again, but among the Rangers his name endured, spoken with quiet respect as one who gave his life for the frontier he helped defend. Howard Posey Jr., son of Texas legend Howard Posey Sr., began his life in quiet labor, working the soil as a farmer and measuring his days by seasons rather than ambition. When the Civil War broke out, that steady rhythm was abruptly broken, and he left his fields behind to answer a call far larger than himself. Though shaped by plough and harvest rather than battle, Howard carried the same endurance and resolve into the conflict, learning quickly that survival required discipline of a different kind. The war marked him deeply, separating his life into a clear before and after, yet he remained defined by the same sense of duty that once guided his hands in the earth. Howard met Rebecca during a season when the land itself seemed uncertain, and yet with her, life felt steady. She was Tonkawa, raised with a deep understanding of the plains, the rivers, and the quiet meanings carried by everyday work. Their bond grew slowly, built on shared labor and long conversations rather than grand declarations. Rebecca taught Howard how to read signs in the wind and sky, while he shared with her his hopes for a settled life after years shaped by conflict. They learned each other's worlds with patience and care, honoring both tradition and change. In a time when borders were shifting and lives were often divided, their relationship became a place of peace, proof that love could take root even on unsettled ground and grow strong through mutual respect. Rebecca called Howard Nahokeo, which means surveyor of the plains in her native tongue. Howard Posey III, son of Howard II, rose to prominence not through land or labor, but through numbers, trust, and careful judgment. In a rapidly growing town where fortunes were made and lost overnight, he built his reputation as a banker who valued stability over spectacle. Howard understood the rhythms of commerce as well as others understood the soil, and his calm presence behind the desk inspired confidence among farmers, merchants, and newcomers alike. While railroads expanded and markets shifted, he remained measured and precise, helping shape the financial backbone of his community. By the end of the century, the Posey name carried new meaning, no longer just tied to frontier survival, but to prosperity and foresight. His favorite saying was, "Money moves fast, but trust moves everything." He was known to repeat it to new clients and young clerks alike, reminding them that in a growing town, reputation mattered more than any single transaction. Milo "Monster" Posey, son of Howard III, gained an unusual kind of fame as an Olympic competitor whose discipline never quite matched his event. A master of speed walking, Milo trained relentlessly, perfecting the rigid form and measured stride demanded by the sport. Unfortunately, his race was the 200-meter dash, where running, not walking, decided victory. While other athletes exploded from the starting line, Milo surged forward with flawless technique and unwavering commitment, arriving last every time to polite applause and puzzled admiration. Though he never claimed a medal, his persistence made him memorable, and Milo Posey became a quiet symbol of determination, proof that dignity could endure even in defeat. Milo Posey lived a long and steady life, one shaped by patience, hard work, and the quiet strength of love. He married Sarah and Davies when they were both young, and together they built a life measured not by grand events, but by shared mornings, growing children, and years that seemed to pass more quickly with each season. Sarah was his constant, wise where he was stubborn, gentle where he was worn thin, and their home became a place of welcome and warmth to all who passed through. Milo worked the land and tended his responsibilities faithfully, while Sarah kept the rhythms of family and hearth, their lives woven together so tightly that it was hard to speak of one without the other. When Milo reached old age, surrounded by descendants who carried pieces of them both, it was said that his greatest accomplishment was not how long he lived, but how fully he shared that life with Sarah and at his side. Kim Jong Posey, son of Monster Posey, served in the army during the Great War, entering the conflict as a young man shaped by discipline and duty. Battle tested him harshly, and a serious injury forced his return home long before the war's end. The wounds he carried were not only physical, they reshaped his sense of purpose and drew him inward toward reflection and faith. In the quiet years that followed his recovery, Kim Jong found solace in spiritual study and ultimately chose a life of service, becoming a priest. From the pulpit, he spoke not of glory or conquest, but of suffering, forgiveness, and the value of peace. His life standing as a testament to how hardship can redirect a man toward compassion and grace. Kim Jong served a small parish where the church bells marked the hours more faithfully than any clock. He wore his black cassock with quiet dignity and drove a dusty pickup from farm to farm, carrying communion to the sick and counsel to those who needed steady words more than sermons. The world beyond the parish was changing. Radios hummed with new music, televisions flickered to life, but inside the church, Father Posey held fast to rituals that grounded his people. He listened more than he spoke, believing that faith was often strengthened not by answers, but by being truly heard. By the decade's end, generations of families measured time not by years, but by the moments Father Posey stood beside them, offering comfort, blessing, and a calm presence in an unsettled age. Tarzan Posey, son of Kim Jong Posey, sat cross-legged on the grass of a city park, a faded peace sign stitched onto his denim jacket, listening to the distant echo of a protest song drifting from a guitar nearby. He had friends who'd gone to Vietnam and letters that stopped coming, and each night he wished, quietly, stubbornly, for the war to end, as if wanting it hard enough might make it so. He believed in small things: shared food, open hands, flowers tucked into rifle barrels, and the idea that love could outlast anger if given the chance. When he marched, he did so not out of rage but hope, holding a handmade sign and imagining a future where no one his age had to learn the sound of helicopters overhead. Long after the crowd dispersed, he remained, eyes closed, wishing for peace with the same sincerity others offered prayers. Tarzan earned his living with calloused hands and long days on construction sites that rose from the hardships of the Great Depression. As America set about rebuilding itself, Tarzan helped pour foundations, raise steel, and shape the structures that promised stability and progress for a new generation. He was known for his strength, steady work ethic, and quiet pride in seeing towns transformed by his labor. Though his name carried a touch of humor among co-workers, Tarzan wore it with good spirit, believing that honest work was the truest measure of a man. Through sweat and perseverance, he became one of countless builders whose efforts quietly helped restore confidence in a nation learning to stand tall again. Tarzan Posey had a voice that could cut through a Texas crowd like a church bell on Sunday morning, and it didn't take long for folks to notice. He learned the rhythm of auctioneering the hard way, standing on dusty stockyards, selling cattle under a blazing sun, his chant rolling smooth and fast, turning noise into music. What set Tarzan apart wasn't just speed, but trust. Buyers believed him, sellers swore by him, and even the nervous animals seemed to settle when he spoke. From small-town barns to state fairs, his name spread until people said if Tarzan Posey was on the block, the sale would be fair and the prices strong. By the time he was known as the best auctioneer in Texas, Tarzan still tipped his hat the same way, grateful that a gift of voice and honesty had carried him farther than he ever expected. Theodore Warren Posey, son of Tarzan Posey, reached adulthood just after World War II had ended, missing the conflict but not the powerful sense of responsibility it left behind. Determined to serve his country, he enlisted in the army, where discipline, attention to detail, and quiet reliability set him apart from his peers. His military service shaped him into a man of precision and restraint, qualities that later opened the door to a career in the United States Secret Service. There, Theodore carried forward the same commitment he had brought to the army, working behind the scenes in a role defined by trust and vigilance. Though his service began after the war, his path reflected a lifelong dedication to protecting the nation in times of peace. Theodore Posey rode in the presidential motorcade through Dallas on November 22, 1963. Trained to remain vigilant under any circumstance, he was moments away when gunfire shattered the routine of duty and thrust the nation into tragedy. Yeah, so that happened? Scott Milo Posey came into the world on a quiet day marked more by feeling than ceremony, his first cry cutting cleanly through the stillness like a promise being kept. He was small, warm, and alive with a stubborn strength that showed itself immediately, curling his fingers as if already holding on to the life ahead of him. Those who gathered around him spoke softly, sensing that this was a beginning worth remembering, a moment where past and future briefly met. His name carried echoes of those who came before him, and as he slept, the room seemed to settle, as though the world had shifted just enough to make space for who he would become. Scott was the kind of young boy who greeted each day with an hour-long conversation, always thinking, always learning by doing. He spent his afternoons exploring fence lines, creek beds, and fields, turning ordinary places into worlds shaped by his imagination. Scraped knees and muddy boots never bothered him. They were simply proof that the day had been lived fully. He listened closely to the stories of older relatives, carrying their lessons with him even when he ran off to play. Even then, there was a steady kindness about Scott Milo, a sense that he was growing into someone who understood both where he came from and where he hoped to go. Scott Milo Posey became a name people in Cedar Hill, said with pride on Friday nights under the stadium lights. As a star football player, he carried himself with the same steady confidence he'd shown as a boy, combining grit, discipline, and an instinct for the game that couldn't be taught. Whether breaking through the line or lifting up a teammate after a hard play, Scott played with heart as much as skill, earning the respect of coaches and crowds alike. Each roar from the stands echoed years of early mornings, worn cleats, and determination, and though the scoreboard told part of the story, it was Scott's leadership and love for the game that made his legacy shine brightest on that Cedar Hill field. When football season ended and the lights dimmed, Scott's dedication never wavered. It simply shifted classrooms. While many knew him for his strength on the field, those closest to him understood that his discipline ran deeper than athletics. He stayed late with textbooks spread across his desk, asked thoughtful questions, and held himself to the same high standard he demanded during practice. On graduation day in Cedar Hill, when Scott stepped to the podium as valedictorian, the crowd rose in surprise and admiration, realizing they had witnessed something rare. His speech was humble and sincere, honoring teachers, teammates, and family, and it became clear that his greatest victories were not only won under stadium lights, but through perseverance, balance, and a belief that excellence should touch every part of life. After graduating at the top of his class, Scott Milo Posey took his drive and determination to the University of Texas, leaving behind familiar fields for the relentless energy of Austin. Though he had once been a standout beneath Friday night lights, he willingly stepped into a quieter role with a football program as a water boy, carrying it out with humility and pride. From the sidelines, he learned a different kind of discipline, anticipating needs before they were spoken, working without recognition, and supporting the team in ways few noticed but all depended on. Wrapped in burnt orange, Scott came to understand that true leadership wasn't always about being seen. Sometimes it was about showing up every day with consistency and heart. Through long practices and game days, his love for football only deepened, grounded in respect for every role that made success possible. It was during this season of his life that Scott met Miss Texas on a warm evening filled with promise. She moved with grace and confidence, yet it was her genuine laughter and steady spirit that captured his attention, revealing a strength that was both quiet and enduring. Their relationship unfolded quickly and with certainty, built on shared values, late-night conversations, and a mutual belief in a future together. In 1988, before the next chapter began, they married, not in pursuit of spectacle, but out of commitment and trust. When Scott prepared to leave, he carried with him more than ambition or resolve. He carried the love of his wife, a bond strong enough to endure distance and sacrifice. Before long, another calling rose above lectures and sidelines alike. It was the same pull that had guided generations of his family, a deep-rooted sense of duty to serve something greater than himself. With quiet determination, Scott left the university and enlisted in the United States Marines, choosing a harder path out of respect for those who had gone before him. The training tested him physically and mentally, distilling life down to discipline, brotherhood, and purpose. Yet he met each challenge with the same focus that had defined him in school and sport. For Scott Milo Posey, service was not a departure from his journey, but its natural continuation, an honor carried forward through family legacy, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. After his service ended, Scott returned home carrying both discipline and restlessness, unsure where the next chapter would lead. Remembering stories of his great-great-grandfather, a man known in the family as the Monster for his relentless work ethic and larger-than-life presence, Scott poured that legacy into an idea of his own, an energy drink he boldly named Monster. He mixed formulas late at night, imagined labels, and chased the spark of building something from nothing. Yet practicality won out over ambition. Doubting the drink had a future beyond a small market, Scott chose to sell the idea and move on. Years later, when Monster rose to become the most popular energy drink on the market, Scott felt no regret, only quiet satisfaction in knowing he had trusted his judgment and stayed true to his path. After leaving the world of business behind, Scott Milo Posey found his stride in a profession that suited his patience, precision, and love of the land: surveying. What began as a practical career quickly became a calling, as Scott developed an almost uncanny ability to read terrain, lines, and boundaries with clarity others admired. Under the Texas sun, he worked long days with quiet focus, earning a reputation as a super surveyor for his accuracy, reliability, and problem-solving instincts. Developers trusted him, landowners respected him, and younger surveyors sought his guidance. In measuring land, Scott found balance, connecting his past of discipline and service with a future built on steady purpose, proving once again that success didn't need applause to be real. After decades of steady work, Scott Milo Posey finally set his equipment down, closing a chapter defined by precision, endurance, and quiet excellence. Retirement didn't slow him so much as it redirected his energy, giving him time to reflect on the stories he'd collected along the way, from football fields and marine training grounds to survey lines stretching across Texas. Scott discovered that even without a uniform or tools in hand, he still had something valuable to offer: experience, insight, and a story worth telling. Perhaps a new venture is on the horizon. Maybe a podcast, if you know what I mean. And we did.